It was a Sunday morning when the town of Dry Creek changed forever. The sun was high, the air was dry, and the streets were quiet. Too quiet. Most folks were sitting on the wooden benches inside the small white church at the end of Main Street, fanning their faces and pretending to care about the preacher's words. Outside, the dust swirled like it knew something was coming. And it was. Just past the ridge, a young man rode slow into town, slim build, dirty boots, black hat pulled low. It was Billy the Kid. Not the outlaw people whispered about in fear, but the kid who'd seen too much, lost too much, and didn't care anymore. And today, he wasn't here to steal, or shoot, or run. He came for one man, and one reason. The preacher. The same preacher who stood in front of the townsfolk every week and spoke about love and forgiveness, while secretly taking money from widows, giving land to rich ranchers, and calling orphans like Billy vermin sent by the devil. Billy remembered every word, and now that man was about to answer for them. Not in court, not with a gun, but with the very thing he'd used to hurt so many, the Bible he preached from. He tied his horse by the well, dusted off his coat, and walked straight toward the church like he owned the dirt under his boots. Inside, the preacher's voice echoed fake kindness, his hands waving that Bible like it had power. Billy pushed open the doors without knocking. The room fell silent. Women gasped, men froze. The preacher's face turned pale like he'd seen a ghost. Billy didn't smile, didn't blink, just stared. "Keep talking, preacher," he said, loud and calm. "I'm here to listen." The preacher's hands shook, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "You got no place here, boy. This is a house of God." Billy stepped forward. "Then let's see if God wants to hear what I've got to say." He walked past every shocked face, past the old folks clutching their crosses, past the kids who stared at him like he was fire. He stopped right in front of the pulpit, just inches from the man who once called him cursed. "You remember what you said to my ma, preacher?" Billy asked, voice low. Said her sickness was punishment for her sins, that if she died, it was 'cause God was cleaning up the town. The preacher looked down. "I speak only what the word says." Billy pulled out the Bible from the preacher's hands, slow and steady, and flipped through it with dusty fingers. "Then it's time you start tasting your words." Billy ripped out a page from the Bible and held it up for the whole church to see. His eyes locked on the preacher, cold and steady. "Eat it," he said. The room didn't move. Not even the wind dared to whisper. The preacher's mouth opened, but no words came. Billy stepped closer, shoving the page against the man's lips. "You fed my mama lies from this book. Now you swallow it." The preacher looked at the crowd, searching for help, but no one moved. Not one man, not one woman. They all remembered how he called poor folks unclean, how he refused to bury a sick child because her daddy drank. They knew this wasn't about faith. It was about justice. Billy's kind of justice. The preacher's hands trembled as he took the page. His lips pressed shut in pride. But Billy's hand moved to his gun. Not a threat, a promise. That page touched his tongue. Dry and bitter. He chewed slow, tears mixing with sweat. The silence in the room wasn't fear. It was relief. Someone had finally stood up to the holy bully. And that someone wore a dusty hat, a long coat, and eyes that didn't blink. Billy stepped back, letting the preacher finish chewing. The man gagged once, twice, but he swallowed it down. Folks watched with their mouths half open, unsure if they were witnessing a crime or a miracle. Then Billy spoke again, voice low but clear as thunder on a quiet night. "One page for every lie you told. One page for every coin you took from the poor." He ripped out another, held it up, and dropped it into the preacher's lap. The old man's hands shook as he picked it up. "Keep going," Billy said. "You're just getting started." A woman in the front pew covered her mouth, hiding a smile. She'd buried 2 sons without a proper prayer because the preacher said they didn't deserve it. An old man in the back nodded slow, remembering how the church turned him away when he had nothing but dust in his pocket. Billy wasn't just punishing a man. He was burning down a sickness, one bite at a time. The preacher kept chewing, his pride breaking with every swallow. And the town, they didn't stop him. They didn't dare. Billy stood in the middle of the church, boots on the holy rug, eyes fixed on the man who once called himself a servant of God. The preacher's face was red now, not from shame. He didn't have enough left for that, but from the strain of swallowing paper and guilt at the same time. Billy reached down and pulled another handful of pages from the Bible. He didn't tear them fast. He took his time. 1, 2, 3, like counting sins. "You remember little Sarah Miller?" Billy asked, voice sharp as a nail. The preacher's jaw froze. "You told the town her mother was cursed, said she brought disease. You made her bury her child without a prayer. I was there." Billy tossed a page on the floor. "You remember Jed Hawkins? He built that well with his own hands. You stood over his grave and said he was a drunk who didn't deserve mercy. Meanwhile, you were taking whiskey money from the mayor." Another page hit the ground. The room felt heavier with each name Billy spoke. These weren't just stories. These were open wounds. And everyone in that church, from the baker to the blacksmith, knew it. Billy wasn't just shaming a man. He was dragging the whole rotten truth into the light, and nobody was stopping him. Billy walked slowly down the aisle, boots echoing against the old wood floor. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Every word hit like a hammer. "You wear that collar like it makes you better than the rest of us," he said, eyes still locked on the preacher. But all it did was hide a snake. The preacher tried to speak, but no sound came out. His lips trembled, face pale now. Billy stepped closer and dropped the torn Bible pages at his feet. "You told people to fear God, while you took from widows, while you turned your back on the sick, while you sat on your high chair and let folks starve so you could eat steak." The silence in the church was deep. Even the wind outside had stopped. One little girl clutched her mother's dress. An old man by the door nodded, slow and tired, like he'd waited years for this. Billy took out his knife, not to use it, but to slice another thick piece of the good book. He handed it to the preacher like communion. "Eat." The preacher shook his head. Billy didn't blink. "Eat, or I carve your lies into that pulpit for everyone to read." The preacher opened his mouth, and the dry paper slid in. It wasn't just punishment. It was a reckoning. A man who spoke the word, forced to swallow the truth he twisted. And Billy, he just stood there, like justice with a 6-shooter, watching the first real sermon the town had ever seen. The preacher chewed slow, each bite like gravel in his mouth. He gagged once, but Billy didn't move. He just stared, arms crossed, eyes cold as desert stone. The townsfolk watched in silence, not one soul daring to interrupt. Some looked away, ashamed they hadn't stood up sooner. Others watched close, like they needed to see this, to believe it was real. Billy wasn't smiling. He wasn't angry. He looked like a man doing what needed to be done, nothing more. He took another torn page from the floor, held it up for everyone to see. "This right here," he said, voice calm. "This book ain't the problem. The problem's the men who use it like a whip and not a light." He threw the page back at the preacher's feet. "You want to save souls? Start by saving your own." The preacher broke down then, hands shaking, tears running down his cheeks. Billy didn't comfort him. He didn't care for the crying of a man who'd watched others suffer while pretending to be holy. He stepped back and looked around the room. Y'all listened to him, trusted him, and he used that trust to live fat while you went hungry. No one spoke. They just listened. Because for once, the truth was louder than the lies. Billy stepped off the stage and walked down the church aisle, boots echoing on the wooden floor. No one moved. Even the air felt tight, like the whole town was holding its breath. A boy near the front pew flinched when Billy passed, but Billy just gave him a nod. Not a smile, not a threat, just a quiet signal that the kid had nothing to fear. Outside, the sky was darkening, clouds rolling in like a warning. Billy stood at the doorway, looking out over the dusty street. Behind him, the preacher still sat on the floor, his lips stained with ink and shame. "Funny thing," Billy said loud enough for the whole town to hear. "The man with the Bible always talks about Judgment Day. Guess he never thought it'd come on horseback." A nervous laugh escaped someone in the back. But Billy wasn't joking. He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, then turned to face the people again. "You want peace? Then stop letting snakes preach salvation. You want respect? Then stop bowing to men who spit when you're not looking." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word stuck like a nail in the wall. And just like that, he stepped out into the wind, coat flapping behind him, eyes fixed on the horizon, like he already knew more trouble was coming. As Billy walked down the main street, the townsfolk stayed frozen in their places, some inside buildings peeking through dusty windows, others out front with hats in hand, eyes wide like they'd just seen a ghost. And maybe they had. Billy wasn't just some outlaw passing through anymore. After what he did to the preacher, he became something else, something folks would whisper about long after he was gone. He stopped in front of the saloon. The piano had gone quiet inside, like even the music was afraid to play. Billy pushed the doors open with one hand and stepped in slow, scanning the room. Every man in there turned to look, but none met his eyes for more than a second. He walked to the bar, leaned in, and said, "Whiskey. The real kind." The bartender nodded quick, poured the glass with shaky hands. Billy didn't drink it right away. He just looked around at the faces, drunks, gamblers, cowards, a few trying hard not to be seen. "You all sat in that church week after week," Billy said, not loud but enough to be heard. "You heard him lie, heard him twist the words, take your money, shame your daughters, and none of you said a damn thing." He picked up the glass and downed the whiskey in one clean gulp. "I ain't here to save you," he added, slamming the glass down. "I'm just here to make sure folks like him don't get away with it anymore." No one answered. No one dared. Billy turned from the bar and walked slow toward the card table in the corner, where 4 men sat frozen mid-game. Chips still in hand, sweat forming on their brows. One of them, a slick-haired fellow with a shiny vest and a pinky ring, tried to look calm. Billy pulled out a chair, turned it backwards, and sat down facing them. "You know who I am," he said. "But I don't know your names, and that's about to change." The man with the ring cleared his throat, trying to sound tough. "We ain't got no trouble with you, kid. We was just playing cards." Billy smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that made your stomach twist. "See, that's the thing. You were playing cards with the preacher yesterday. Heard you laughed when he called that widow woman a witch. Heard you kept dealing while he called her a curse on this town." The room felt 10 degrees colder. No one moved. The man across from Billy tried to speak, but only managed a nervous cough. Billy leaned forward, close enough to see the panic in his eyes. "I ain't here to shoot gamblers. I'm here to see who's got a spine, who's ready to stand up now that the big bad preacher's gone." The silence dragged. Then, finally, a voice from the table said soft, "He had it coming. We all knew, just didn't think it'd be you to handle it." Billy nodded once, then stood. "Then remember, it wasn't the law that stepped in. It was me. And if you let another snake like him grow roots here again, I'll be back. But next time, I won't stop with one man." Billy walked out of the saloon, his boots heavy on the wooden porch. The streets were quieter now, like the town itself was holding its breath. Some folks peeked through curtains, others stayed flat against walls, pretending not to watch. But everyone was listening. Billy lit a match on his boot heel and brought it to a cigar he'd swiped from the preacher's own coat. Took one long drag, then let the smoke roll slow from his mouth. At the far end of the street, the blacksmith's boy stood frozen, holding a horseshoe like it was a shield. Billy raised his hand, not to threaten, but to show he saw him. "Don't worry, kid," he said loud enough for all to hear. "I don't come for the scared, I come for the cruel." With that, he turned toward the church. The big white building stood tall, empty now, but still casting a long shadow. Billy stepped inside. The air was still thick with the preacher's voice, even if the man himself was gone. The heavy Bible sat on the podium, just like always. Billy picked it up, felt the weight, walked it to the pews and set it down on the bench like he was tucking in a sleeping child. "You won't be needed for lies anymore," he whispered. Then he turned, tipped his hat to the cross behind him, and walked out into the sunlight. Billy stepped back onto the dusty street with the same calm he always had, like nothing could touch him. But inside something was still burning. Not guilt, not regret. Just that old fire that lit up whenever he saw someone powerful using God or law to crush the weak. A small crowd had gathered by now. Not a mob, more like a pack of lost sheep. Farmers, wives, kids with dirty faces, the same folks who used to nod at the preacher like he was a king. They didn't cheer for Billy. They didn't run either, just watched. Quiet, waiting. Sheriff Dugan stood near the well, hand resting on his revolver but not drawing. "That Bible stunt," he muttered. "Gonna get you hanged one day, Billy." Billy tilted his head and grinned, not out of joy, but because the sheriff still didn't get it. "Only if the rope's holy," he said. A woman stepped forward then, gray hair, wrinkled hands. She clutched a rosary, but her eyes weren't soft. They were sharp, like she'd seen too many lies dressed in Sunday clothes. "That preacher baptized my baby," she said. "Told me she died 'cause I sinned." Billy didn't answer. He just nodded once. That was enough. A few others started whispering. And for the first time, the town looked at their church not as a place of peace, but as the place where they'd been judged and used. Billy didn't say much after that. He just stood there, boots planted firm in the dirt, eyes scanning every face in that quiet crowd. The sheriff didn't move, the people didn't move, and for a long second, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then a boy stepped out from behind his father. Couldn't have been more than 10. Dirty shirt, one shoe missing, holding a little wooden toy that looked like a horse. He looked up at Billy and said, "Is it true? You made the preacher eat the Bible?" Billy looked down at the boy. His face didn't soften, his voice didn't change. But he crouched so he could meet the kid eye to eye. "I didn't make him eat God," Billy said. "I made him taste what it's like to lie in his name." The boy didn't blink, just nodded. And that was it. No lecture, no lesson, just truth, plain and hard like the land they all stood on. From the back of the crowd, someone spat on the ground. Then another turned and walked away. And then another. The church door was still open, the preacher's shouts now just weak moans inside. But nobody went to help him, not even the sheriff. Billy stood up slow, dusted off his knees, and turned his back to the crowd like he didn't care if anyone came at him. That's the thing about Billy. He never moved like he was scared. He walked toward his horse, calm as Sunday morning, while folks just stared, too stunned to speak, too afraid to breathe loud. Behind him, The preacher was still coughing, his voice broken now, not from the Bible but from the truth finally shoved down his throat. No one dared to lift him, not after what came out. Because what Billy forced him to confess that day wasn't just about lies. It was about the things he'd done when no one was watching, when the pews were empty and the doors were locked. Billy knew. And now, the whole town knew too. A woman near the well dropped her bucket. A man near the general store took off his hat and held it to his chest. But Billy didn't look back, not once. He just said to himself, loud enough for the wind to carry it, "Justice don't always wear a badge." And he kept walking. As Billy reached the edge of town, his boots kicking up dust in steady rhythm, a little boy stepped out from behind a barrel near the saloon. Couldn't have been more than 10. Big eyes, torn hat, clutching something behind his back. Billy stopped. The boy stared up at him, nervous but not scared. "Mister," he said, voice small. "Was it true? What he did?" Billy didn't blink. "Yeah, and worse." The boy nodded like he already knew, like kids always do when grown folks lie too much. Then he pulled out what he was hiding, a worn-out Bible with the cover half gone and the pages bent from heat and age. "My mama read from this. She said God don't like folks who hurt people in his name." Billy took the book, turned it over in his hands, and handed it back. "Your mama's right." The boy smiled, small and shy, then ran off. Billy watched him go for a second, then swung up onto his horse. He didn't need applause, didn't want thanks. That town had seen what it needed to, and now it had to decide what kind of place it was gonna be. Billy wasn't waiting to find out. He had other roads to ride and other devils to chase. Billy didn't ride far that day, just enough to feel the wind again and let the town's noise fall behind him. But as the sun started dipping low, painting the sky in orange and red like a brush dragged through fire, he pulled up near an old windmill, half broken, squeaking with every turn. There was a man sitting there already, chewing on a twig, hat low over his eyes. Billy didn't say a word. He just sat across from him, both of them watching the wind spin like time itself. After a while, the man looked up. "Heard what you did back there." Billy didn't answer. He never explained himself. "That preacher, he had it coming," the man added, as if trying to make sense of it. Billy's jaw tightened. A man who twists God into a weapon ain't worth the dust he walks on. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint sound of church bells from the distant town. Billy closed his eyes for a second, listening. "That sound," he said, "used to mean peace. Now it just reminds me of the lies people hide behind." The man didn't argue. He just nodded, then stood up, gave Billy a quiet look, and walked away into the growing dark. Billy stayed a while longer, just him, the wind, and a sky full of ghosts. Billy sat alone until the stars showed up one by one, quiet little eyes in the dark sky. The air had cooled, and the desert night settled in like a blanket full of secrets. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. But deep in his gut, something was stirring. Not regret. Billy didn't regret things. But a kind of weight, like dust building on his boots. He thought about the preacher, how the man's voice used to echo down Main Street every Sunday, calling folks to sit and listen. And how that same voice turned sour behind closed doors when nobody was looking. Billy knew what he did wasn't holy, but it sure as hell felt right. That preacher made people feel small, scared, ashamed of their own hearts. And Billy, he'd had enough of people like that. That's why he did it. Not to be a hero, not to be feared, but to remind them. Remind them that power, when it's cruel, always answers to someone eventually. And sometimes that someone rides alone, with fire in his eyes and silence on his lips. The next morning, the town was different. Quieter. Folks walked slower, heads down, like the dust carried more than just wind. It carried what happened on the church steps. Billy walked through that same street, calm as ever, boots crunching over dirt, spurs jingling soft like wind chimes in a storm. People moved out of his way without a word. Some looked scared, some looked grateful, but nobody dared meet his eyes. At the saloon, the piano was quiet. No one laughed. Billy ordered a black coffee and sat by the window. He didn't need to talk. He'd already said everything without opening his mouth. That Bible, chewed and spit, still lay in front of the church door like a warning sign carved in silence. Preacher was gone. Nobody knew where. Maybe he ran. Maybe he buried himself in shame. Or maybe he was still in town, hiding behind curtains, hoping Billy would just keep walking. But Billy didn't walk away just yet. He watched. He waited. Because sometimes evil doesn't run. It crawls back, pretending it changed. And Billy, he didn't believe in change. Not unless it bled. That afternoon, the sky turned the color of burnt ash, and thunder rumbled low, like the growl of a hungry beast. Billy stood outside the general store, lighting a match on the side of his boot, the flame flickering against the wind. Inside his coat was a letter. Not written by him. Billy didn't waste words on paper, but by one of the townsfolk, a girl named Lucy, whose father the preacher had ruined. She'd left it on his saddle that morning, just a few lines thanking him, calling him a storm that cleaned the sky. Billy didn't smile, but he folded the note real careful, like it meant something, and tucked it in a place no one could steal. He didn't want praise. He didn't want thanks. He just wanted people like the preacher to know, if you use power to hurt the weak, someone will come knocking. And that someone might not be kind, might not be fair, but he'll be true. Billy rode out as the first drops hit the dirt, thunder cracking behind him. And the people of that town, they'd never forget the boy with fire in his eyes, who made the preacher eat every word he ever twisted. By the time Billy reached the edge of the next ridge, the rain had turned the dirt roads into thick brown rivers. His hat dripped steady, and mud clung to his boots like old sins. He wasn't running. Billy never ran, but he wasn't lingering either. Word spread fast in the west, faster than gunfire, faster than a lie in a saloon. And he knew the preacher had friends in high places, the kind of men who wore tin stars but carried no justice in their hearts. Still, Billy didn't flinch. He stopped at a cabin owned by a widow who once fed him cornbread and black coffee when he had nothing. She opened the door without asking questions. Her eyes said she'd heard. He sat by her fire in silence, dripping, steaming, quiet as a ghost. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, he sharpened his knife slow and steady, not because he planned to use it, but because in a world like his, you never knew when kindness would end and survival would begin. The storm broke just before sunrise, leaving the sky bruised and swollen, like it had taken a beating overnight. Billy stepped out of the cabin, his boots sinking into the wet earth, the steam of the fire still clinging to his coat. He didn't say goodbye to the widow. He just tipped his hat, like always. She nodded back, like always. They understood each other. People like them didn't waste words when the road ahead might be your last. As Billy rode down the trail, the trees whispered like old women in church pews. He wasn't headed for safety. He was headed straight into the Hornet's Nest, Red Rock Junction, where the sheriff and his posse were already waiting, hungry for revenge. The preacher's Bible had made its rounds. Folks talked. They said Billy went too far, that maybe he'd finally crossed a line even the desert couldn't bury. But Billy didn't care. Not about gossip, not about lawmen, not about judgment. He only cared about one thing now, making sure the next man who thought he could play God with a badge or a Bible thought twice before opening his mouth. The sun hung low when Billy rode into Red Rock Junction, casting long, mean shadows across the ground. The town looked different now. Quieter, like it knew trouble had come back. Men peeked through cracked shutters. Women pulled their kids off the porches. Even the dogs stopped barking. At the saloon, 4 horses were tied out front, sheriff's horses. Billy dismounted slow, boots hitting the dirt like gunshots. He didn't go in fast. He didn't need to. His presence alone stirred the dust, made the air feel heavier. Inside, the sheriff and 3 deputies sat around a poker table. They'd been waiting. Drinks untouched, guns on their laps. The sheriff stood first, gray-haired, tall and hard-eyed. "Heard you made a preacher eat his own Bible," he said, voice low like thunder about to roll. Billy didn't blink. Man should taste the words he throws at others. The sheriff smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You made this personal, boy." Billy stepped closer. "It was always personal. You just pretended it wasn't." And just like that, the room went still. Everyone knew. Words were done. Billy didn't flinch when the sheriff reached for his gun. He was faster, always had been. Before the sheriff's fingers brushed iron, Billy had already drawn, fired, and stepped aside. The shot echoed like a thunderclap in a canyon. The sheriff dropped, his revolver still half-holstered, eyes wide with disbelief. The deputies stood frozen, unsure if they should draw or pray. Billy didn't give them a choice. He walked toward them, slow and steady, gun raised but calm, like a man swatting flies. "Don't," he said. 1 word. That's all it took. The youngest deputy dropped his weapon and backed into a corner. The other 2 followed. No hero speeches, no last stands, just fear. Billy stepped over the sheriff's body, pushed open the saloon doors, and walked back into the fading light. Behind him, silence. Ahead of him, more dust and more ghosts. He didn't smile, didn't say a word. He just kept walking, like the devil had given him a mission, and the world was full of names on a list. Billy stepped outside and saw the preacher still on his knees, trembling, hands pressed together like he was trying to hold his soul in place. The townsfolk had all gathered now, men, women, kids, hiding behind barrels, doors, windows. No one dared speak. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched across the dirt like claws. Billy walked straight up to the preacher, the Bible still laying open in the dust where it had fallen. He picked it up, brushed it off, then looked down at the old man. "You remember what you said about me?" Billy asked, his voice calm, quiet, deadly. The preacher nodded, barely. "You said I was beyond saving, that I was the devil in a boy's skin." Billy held out the Bible. "Then eat the words, preacher, one by one." The man's eyes widened, horror filling the cracks on his wrinkled face. But he didn't move. "Eat." Billy said it like a command from God himself. The preacher took the book with shaking hands. Then, slow as molasses, he tore a page, looked up at Billy, and placed it in his mouth. The paper stuck to his tongue. He gagged, swallowed. Another page. The town watched in silence, no one daring to interfere. It was cruel. It was justice. Maybe both. Billy just stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed like cold iron. And the preacher, he kept chewing, kept choking, because deep down, he knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And Billy made sure everyone saw it. Billy didn't say a word for a long time. He just watched the preacher, now coughing and crying in the dirt, bits of holy paper stuck to his lips. The wind had died down. The street was so quiet you could hear the creak of a wooden sign swinging above the saloon. Then Billy turned, real slow, faced the crowd, his boots heavy in the dust. His voice came low but sharp. "This town's been run by fear, not of me, of silence, of watching good folks get stepped on while men like him hide behind sermons and lies." He pointed back at the preacher without looking. "You all let it happen. You all knew." No one spoke. No one denied it. One old man near the general store took off his hat. A mother pulled her child behind her skirt. Billy stepped toward them, not angry, just tired. "I ain't the devil, but I ain't your savior neither. I'm just what happens when people get pushed too far for too long." He looked at the sky now, that soft golden light sinking into purple. Preacher thought God was on his side, but maybe God don't pick sides out here. Maybe he just watches to see who's got the guts to stand up. Billy dropped the Bible into the preacher's lap. "Keep eating, or start preaching different." Then he walked past the townsfolk, each one parting like a river around him. No cheers, no applause. Just the long silence of people who knew they'd just seen something they'd remember till their last breath. Billy kept walking, past the sheriff's office, past the saloon, past the horse trough where the preacher once baptized folks like it meant something. The preacher stayed on his knees, hands trembling over that tattered Bible like it was suddenly heavier than stone. A few folks helped him up, but no one looked him in the eye. No one said a word. Up the hill, near the edge of town, Billy stood by his horse. He didn't mount it right away. He just stared down at the town like he was trying to figure out what to feel. Anger, regret, peace. None of it came. Just that same old emptiness that had followed him since the day he picked up a gun instead of a Bible. Behind him, a voice cracked through the air. "Billy." It was the schoolteacher. Ms. Clara, the only one who ever spoke to him like he was a boy and not a storm. She walked up slow, eyes red but steady. "That boy you defended. He's safe now. You did that." Billy didn't turn. "Yeah. And what'll he grow into? Another me?" Clara stepped closer. "Maybe. Or maybe he'll grow into someone who remembers the day someone finally stood up. Someone who wasn't afraid to look a monster in the eye and say no more." Billy nodded once. Not big. Just enough. Then he pulled his hat low, mounted his horse, and said nothing. Just turned toward the horizon, where the sky was bleeding red. Billy rode slow, letting the town shrink behind him, but the weight of what happened stayed heavy in his chest. The desert stretched out wide and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man think too much. He remembered the preacher's face, full of pride one minute, full of fear the next. And he remembered that boy's eyes, how they looked at him like he was a hero, not a killer. That was the part that burned the most. Billy wasn't no hero. He'd done what he did, 'cause it had to be done, not 'cause it was right. Still, something about it stuck. For once, he hadn't drawn first just to survive. He'd done it for someone else. That was new. He stopped by a dry riverbed, let his horse drink from what little water pooled there. The sun was dipping low, the sky going gold and purple. Billy reached into his coat, pulled out that burned Bible cover. He hadn't tossed it like he planned. Just couldn't. He looked at it for a long time, the edges black, the pages curled, but one verse still clear on the inside cover. "Even the wicked can be redeemed." Billy laughed under his breath. Guess they never met me. But he didn't throw it away. Instead, he slid it back into his coat, mounted up again, and rode on. Not toward nowhere, but somewhere. He just didn't know the name of it yet. The next town Billy rode into was called Dry Creek. Just one saloon, one sheriff, and a whole lot of dust. The kind of place where everyone pretended not to notice trouble until it knocked on their own door. Billy tied his horse outside the saloon, walked in, and felt every pair of eyes turn. Some folks recognized him. Others just felt the cold in the room. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just went straight to the bar and asked for water. Not whiskey. Water. The bartender's hands shook as he poured it. Billy didn't speak much, just sat there, listening. he heard whispers. A man had been beating his wife. Sheriff wouldn't step in. Turns out the man owned half the land around. Folks were scared. Billy wasn't. That night, he waited. And when the man staggered out of the saloon drunk, Billy followed. Didn't draw, didn't shout. Just walked behind him, quiet as a shadow. He caught him by the barn, dragged him by the collar, and spoke low, right in his ear. "Next time you raise your hand to her, I'll cut it off and feed it to your pigs." The man stammered, eyes wide. Billy let him go, walked away. He didn't look back. Next morning, word was the man left town before sunrise. No one knew where. No one cared. And for the first time, the sheriff tipped his hat to Billy when he rode out. Didn't say thank you, just a look. But that was enough. Billy didn't stay long after Dry Creek. He never did. He wasn't the type to wait around for applause or thanks. That wasn't his nature. He left the same way he came, quiet, focused, with dust on his boots and a storm behind his eyes. But that town remembered him, not as a hero, not as a villain, just as Billy the Kid. The boy who didn't blink in front of a gun, who didn't flinch at cruelty, and who made a preacher eat his own Bible because his words had turned rotten. By the time the story reached the next county, folks were already twisting it into legend. Some said Billy lit the Bible on fire before feeding it to the preacher. Others said the sky turned black when it happened. None of it was true, but all of it felt real. And maybe that's what Billy became in the end. Not a man, but a shadow walking through the cracks of justice, doing what others wouldn't. Was he right? Was he wrong? That ain't the point. The point is, no one ever forgot him. And if you're still here, still riding along this story with us, then you know, it's only the beginning. So hit that subscribe button, partner. Because we've got more tales from the dust, more fire behind the legend, and Billy's just getting started.